I never thought the most popular boy in school would even learn my name. Smith had the perfect smile, perfect friends, perfect life. But the day he sat beside me in the school cafeteria and whispered, "Jimmy, can I tell you a secret?" Everything changed. Because 1 week later, the entire school thought he was dating the cheer captain, while he was secretly holding my hand behind the football stadium. Jimmy Carter had mastered the art of being invisible. At 18 years old, he moved through the crowded halls of Jefferson High in Austin, Texas, like someone nobody really noticed. He wasn't bullied. He wasn't popular either. He existed quietly between both worlds, smart enough to get perfect grades, quiet enough to avoid drama, and shy enough that most students forgot he was even there. Every morning before first period, Jimmy sat alone near the cafeteria windows with a coffee and his headphones on, pretending not to notice the loud groups around him. But every single morning, one person always caught his attention. Smith Walker, the boy everyone at Jefferson High talked about. Football captain, perfect smile, confident without even trying. The kind of guy teachers trusted, students admired, and cameras somehow loved during school events. Girls stared whenever he walked past. Guys tried to act like him, and Jimmy tried very hard not to look at him too long. It never worked. Sometimes Smith laughed so loudly across the cafeteria that Jimmy found himself smiling without meaning to. Sometimes he caught Smith helping nervous freshmen carry books or joking around with teachers in the hallway. Unlike most popular guys, Smith never acted cruel or arrogant. That somehow made Jimmy like him even more, which was a problem, because boys like Smith never noticed boys like Jimmy. At least that's what Jimmy believed. Until one Monday morning changed everything. Jimmy was halfway through his coffee when someone stopped beside his table. "You're Jimmy, right?" Jimmy looked up so quickly he nearly dropped his cup. Smith Walker stood there holding a backpack over one shoulder, sunlight coming through the cafeteria windows behind him like something straight out of a movie scene. Jimmy blinked twice. Yeah." Smith smiled warmly. Not the fake social smile he gave teachers. A real one. "I need help," Smith admitted dramatically. "I'm losing a very violent battle against chemistry." Jimmy stared at him in complete confusion. "You want me to tutor you?" "Please," Smith said, placing a hand over his chest like he was dying. "My grade is hanging on by a thread." Jimmy honestly thought it might be a prank, but Smith looked completely serious and weirdly nervous. "Sure," Jimmy answered quietly. Smith instantly grinned. "You're officially my favorite person now." Jimmy's heart almost stopped. Before Jimmy could process anything, Smith sat down across from him like they'd known each other forever. The cafeteria noise suddenly felt distant. Jimmy became painfully aware of everything. Smith's warm brown eyes, the faint smell of cologne on his hoodie, the way his smile somehow made Jimmy forget basic English. "So," Smith said casually, "do you always sit alone?" Jimmy looked down at his coffee. "Usually." Smith frowned slightly. "That's kind of depressing." Jimmy laughed quietly despite himself. "There it is," Smith said immediately. Jimmy looked confused. "What?" "That laugh. I was trying to get you to do that." Jimmy's face turned red instantly. Smith noticed. But instead of teasing him, his expression softened. For the first time in a long time, Jimmy didn't feel invisible. That afternoon, they met in the library after school. Jimmy expected the session to be awkward. Instead, Smith somehow turned chemistry tutoring into the easiest conversation Jimmy had ever had. He asked random questions while pretending to study. "What's your favorite movie? Why do you always wear black hoodies? Why do you look nervous every time I talk to you?" Jimmy nearly choked on his water. "I don't look nervous." Smith raised an eyebrow playfully. "Jimmy, you dropped your pencil 3 times in 10 minutes. Jimmy buried his face in his hands while Smith laughed softly. And somehow, the laughter didn't feel mean. It felt warm, safe. By the end of the study session, the library was nearly empty. Golden evening sunlight poured through the tall windows while students slowly disappeared from campus. Jimmy leaned over his notebook explaining a chemistry equation when Smith moved closer beside him. Their shoulders touched lightly. Jimmy froze instantly. Smith didn't move away. Instead, he looked down at Jimmy's notes with a small smile. "You smell like vanilla." Jimmy's brain completely stopped working. It's just shampoo, he mumbled nervously. Smith smiled without looking up. I like it. Jimmy forgot how breathing worked for a solid 5 seconds. The silence between them suddenly felt different. Softer. Closer. Jimmy could hear his own heartbeat. Smith finally looked at him again, and for one dangerous second, Jimmy thought maybe Smith felt it too. Then the moment broke when someone entered the library loudly. Jimmy leaned back quickly, pretending to focus on his notebook again, but his hands were shaking slightly. When the session ended, Smith walked with him through the nearly empty parking lot outside school. The warm Texas sunset painted the sky orange and gold above them. You free tomorrow? Smith asked casually. For tutoring? Smith smiled. Sure. Let's pretend it's for tutoring. Jimmy looked at him in surprise. Smith laughed quietly. I'm kidding. Mostly. Jimmy felt his stomach flip again. Before climbing into his truck, Smith looked back at him. See you tomorrow, Jimmy. The way he said Jimmy's name sounded unfairly soft. Jimmy stood there watching Smith drive away while his chest felt completely out of control. That night, Jimmy lay awake staring at his bedroom, ceiling replaying every second of the day. Smith smiled. Smith sitting beside him. Smith saying he liked the smell of his shampoo. Jimmy kept telling himself not to overthink it. Popular guys were naturally friendly sometimes. That had to be all this was, right? But deep down, Jimmy already knew something dangerous was starting. And the scariest part? He wasn't sure he wanted it to stop. For the next 2 weeks, Jimmy's life became dangerously confusing. Because somehow, the most popular boy at Jefferson High had become part of his everyday routine. Smith started sitting with him every morning before class. He texted constantly. He walked Jimmy to class even when it made him late for football practice. And every time Jimmy convinced himself he was imagining things, Smith did something that made his heart spiral all over again. Like touching Jimmy's shoulder while laughing, or remembering tiny details nobody else noticed, or looking at Jimmy for just a second too long. It was driving Jimmy insane. One Thursday afternoon, they stayed late after school for another chemistry study session, even though Jimmy had started suspecting Smith barely cared about chemistry anymore. The library closed early for a faculty meeting, forcing them outside. Guest tutoring's canceled, Jimmy said while putting books into his backpack. Smith smirked. Or we could continue somewhere else. Jimmy looked at him nervously. Where? Smith pointed toward the football field behind the school. Come on. The sun was beginning to set as they crossed the empty campus together. Warm orange light stretched across the bleachers while distant traffic echoed from nearby streets. It felt strangely peaceful without students everywhere. Jimmy followed Smith toward the back of the stadium where equipment rooms and storage buildings sat quietly behind the field. You spent a lot of time here? Jimmy asked. Too much, Smith admitted. Coach practically lives here. Jimmy smiled softly. Smith glanced at him. There's that smile again. Jimmy immediately looked away. Smith laughed quietly under his breath. What? Jimmy asked defensively. You get shy every time I compliment you. Well, you compliment me a lot. Smith shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets. Maybe because I mean them. Jimmy's chest tightened. Before he could respond, voices suddenly echoed nearby. Smith stopped walking instantly. 2 football players appeared near the equipment building around the corner, not noticing Jimmy and Smith yet. Jimmy recognized one of them immediately, Tyler Benson, one of Smith's teammates. You seriously spend more time with Jimmy than the team now, Tyler joked loudly. Smith stayed silent. Tyler laughed again. Bro, people think you're secretly dating him. Jimmy's stomach dropped. He instinctively stepped backward, ready to leave before they saw him. Then Smith answered quietly. And if I am? Everything stopped. Jimmy froze completely. Tyler stared at Smith in shock. Wait, seriously? Smith looked calm, but Jimmy noticed the nervous tension in his jaw. I'm saying it's nobody's business. Tyler blinked several times. Dude, Ashley Monroe literally told people you liked her. Smith rolled his eyes. Ashley likes attention. Jimmy's heartbeat pounded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. Then his backpack slipped from his shoulder and hit the concrete ground with a loud thud. Silence. Tyler turned around instantly. Smith's eyes widened when he saw Jimmy standing there. For one painful second, nobody moved. Then Tyler awkwardly cleared his throat. I'm gonna go. He disappeared almost immediately, leaving Jimmy and Smith alone beside the stadium. Jimmy's pulse felt completely out of control. Smith slowly walked toward him. "You heard that," he said softly. Jimmy nodded once. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The evening air suddenly felt colder. Jimmy looked down nervously. "You meant it." Smith stepped closer. "Yes." Jimmy swallowed hard. "You like guys?" Smith gave a quiet laugh without humor. "Yeah. Took me a while to admit it to myself." Jimmy looked stunned. "And there's someone I can't stop thinking about." Jimmy's chest tightened harder. Smith looked directly into his eyes. "It's you." Jimmy forgot how breathing worked. The entire world seemed to disappear around them. The empty football field, the fading sunset, the distant sounds of traffic. None of it felt real anymore. Jimmy stared at him in shock. "Me?" Smith nodded slowly. "I tried not to," he admitted quietly. "I really did." Jimmy's heart raced painfully fast. Smith continued, "But then you smile at me, or laugh at my stupid jokes, or explain chemistry like it's the easiest thing in the world." He shook his head slightly. "And suddenly you're all I think about." Jimmy felt emotionally overwhelmed in the best possible way. No one had ever looked at him like this before. No one had ever chosen him. Smith stepped even closer now, close enough for Jimmy to notice the nervousness hidden beneath all that confidence. "I know this is probably a lot," Smith said softly. "And if you don't feel the same, I swear I'll back off." Jimmy interrupted him before fear could take over. "I do." Smith blinked. "You do?" Jimmy nodded shyly. "I like you the second you sat at my table." The smile that appeared on Smith's face looked almost relieved, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "You have no idea how happy that makes me," he admitted. Jimmy laughed nervously while looking down. Smith gently reached for his hand. Not suddenly, not aggressively, just careful and slow, giving Jimmy every chance to pull away. But Jimmy didn't. The second their fingers intertwined, warmth rushed through his chest. Smith smiled softly at him. "There you are." Jimmy's heartbeat nearly exploded. The stadium lights flickered on above them as evening settled over campus. And standing there behind the football field, Jimmy realized this wasn't a crush anymore. This was real. Smith slowly leaned closer. Jimmy froze when their foreheads touched gently. "You're shaking," Smith whispered with a small smile. "I'm trying not to pass out." Smith laughed softly. The sound made Jimmy smile instantly. Then Smith's expression softened again. "Can I kiss you?" Jimmy's entire body felt weightless. He nodded quietly. Smith kissed him carefully. Soft, warm, sweet enough to make Jimmy forget every fear he'd ever had. It only lasted a few seconds, but somehow it changed everything. When they finally pulled apart, neither of them moved very far away. Jimmy could still feel Smith's breath, still feel his hand holding tightly onto his. Smith looked completely stunned. "Wow," he whispered. Jimmy laughed nervously. "Yeah." For the first time in his life, Jimmy didn't feel invisible anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, Smith looked genuinely happy. By the following Monday, Jefferson High felt completely different. Not because anything official had happened, but because once two people start looking at each other differently, everyone notices eventually. Jimmy noticed it first in the cafeteria. Usually, Smith sat with the football team near the center of the room, while Jimmy stayed quietly near the windows with his headphones and coffee. But now, Smith kept looking over at him, constantly, every few seconds. And every single time their eyes met, Smith smiled automatically like he couldn't help himself. It was becoming a serious problem for Jimmy's heart, especially because people were starting to notice. "You okay?" Jimmy nearly jumped when his best friend Maya slid into the seat across from him during lunch. "You look terrified." Jimmy almost choked on his drink. "I'm fine." Maya narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Then why does Smith Walker keep staring at you like you're the last person on earth?" Jimmy froze. "What?" Maya slowly turned around. Across the cafeteria, Smith was openly watching Jimmy while talking to his teammates. The second Smith noticed Jimmy looking back, he smiled again. Jimmy's face turned completely red. "Oh my God," Maya whispered dramatically. Something is happening. Nothing is happening. Jimmy lied terribly. Maya leaned closer. Jimmy, the football captain looks at you like you personally invented happiness. Jimmy buried his face in his hands while Maya laughed quietly. Unfortunately, Maya wasn't the only one noticing. Within days, rumors started spreading through school faster than Jimmy could process. Some people whispered when he walked by. Some students looked confused. Others looked weirdly excited about the drama. Jimmy hated every second of it. One afternoon after English class, he overheard two girls talking near the lockers. Smith hangs out with Jimmy literally every day now. I heard they leave school together too. No straight guy smiles like that at another guy. Jimmy immediately turned the other direction before they noticed him listening. His chest felt tight the entire rest of the day. After final period, he found Smith waiting beside his truck in the parking lot. The moment Smith saw Jimmy's expression, his smile faded slightly. What happened? Jimmy looked down while adjusting his backpack strap nervously. People are talking. Smith stayed quiet. Jimmy continued softly. They think something's going on between us. Smith leaned against the truck casually. Something is going on between us. Jimmy looked around the parking lot anxiously. You know what I mean? Smith studied him carefully for a second. You scared? Jimmy hated how quickly he answered. Yes. Smith's expression softened instantly. Without caring who might see, he stepped closer to Jimmy. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Jimmy's heart ached hearing that. It's easy for you, he admitted quietly. Everybody loves you. Smith gave a small laugh. Jimmy, people love the version of me they think exists. Jimmy frowned slightly. Smith looked away toward the fading sunset over the parking lot. You know how exhausting it is pretending to be someone else all the time? Jimmy stayed silent. Smith looked back at him again. Because honestly, the only time I feel completely real lately is when I'm with you. Jimmy's chest melted instantly. Smith opened the passenger door of his truck. Come on. Where are we going? You'll see. 20 minutes later, they were parked on a quiet hill overlooking downtown Austin. The city skyline glowed beautifully against the evening sky, while music played softly through the truck speakers. Jimmy smiled faintly. This is nice. Smith looked proud of himself. I know a few decent places. Jimmy laughed quietly. There was again that look. Smith watching him like his smile mattered more than anything else in the world. Jimmy looked down shyly. Why do you keep staring at me like that? Smith answered immediately. Because you're cute. Jimmy covered his face instantly while Smith laughed. I'm serious, Smith continued. You get all nervous and your cheeks turn red, and it's honestly kind of adorable. You're impossible, Jimmy muttered. And you like me anyway. Jimmy smiled without denying it. The truck grew quiet for a moment. Comfortable quiet. The kind Jimmy had never experienced with anyone before. Then Smith reached across the center console slowly. Jimmy's heartbeat sped up instantly as Smith intertwined their fingers carefully. Warmth rushed through Jimmy's chest all over again. Smith rubbed his thumb gently against Jimmy's hand. I've wanted to do that all day. Jimmy looked at him softly. People might have seen us leave together. Smith shrugged. Okay. Jimmy stared at him in disbelief. You seriously don't care? Smith thought about it for a second before answering honestly. I care about you more. Jimmy's entire chest felt too full emotionally. Nobody had ever chosen him like this before. Nobody had ever made him feel important. Outside the truck windows, Austin traffic moved beneath glowing city lights. Inside, everything felt softer. Closer. Smith turned slightly toward him. You know what the weirdest part is? He asked quietly. What? I used to think you hated me. Jimmy looked shocked. Why would I hate you? You never looked at me. Jimmy laughed nervously. That's because every time I looked at you, I forgot how to act like a normal person. Smith grinned immediately. So you did have a crush on me. Jimmy groaned dramatically. Please stop looking so proud of yourself. Never. Jimmy shook his head while smiling. Then Smith's expression softened again. Slowly, carefully, he leaned closer. Jimmy's breathing immediately became uneven. Even after the kiss behind the football field, this still felt unreal. Smith paused inches away from him. Still okay? He whispered. Jimmy nodded softly. Smith kissed him gently. Longer this time. Slow enough that Jimmy forgot every rumor every stare, every nervous thought in his head. For those few seconds, nothing existed except warmth, music, and Smith's hand holding his. When they finally pulled apart, Smith rested his forehead lightly against Jimmy's. "You have no idea how obsessed I am with you," he admitted quietly. Jimmy laughed shyly. "You're dramatic. I'm serious." Jimmy smiled, so hard his cheeks hurt. And somewhere deep down, despite all the rumors and fear and uncertainty, he realized he was starting to fall completely in love with him. By the time spring arrived in Austin, hiding had become almost impossible. Not because Smith and Jimmy were careless, but because love has a way of showing itself even when people try to keep it quiet. Smith still walked Jimmy to class every morning. They still spent nearly every afternoon together. And somehow, without even discussing it, they had become inseparable. People talked constantly now. Some students were supportive. Some were curious. A few were rude about it. But Smith never let any of it change the way he looked at Jimmy. If anything, he became even more protective. One Friday afternoon after school, Jimmy sat on the hood of Smith's truck outside a small coffee shop downtown while waiting for Smith to bring their drinks. The warm spring breeze moved softly through the street while music echoed from nearby stores. Jimmy smiled to himself while checking his phone. "Somebody looks happy." Jimmy looked up instantly. Ashley Monroe stood nearby holding an iced coffee. Jimmy felt awkward immediately. Ashley had always been kind to him, but everyone knew she used to like Smith. "Hey," Jimmy said nervously. Ashley glanced toward the coffee shop window where Smith was paying at the counter. Then she smiled knowingly. "So it's true." Jimmy's stomach tightened. Before he could answer, Ashley laughed softly. "Relax. I'm not mad." Jimmy blinked in surprise. Ashley leaned against the truck beside him. "You know he talks about you constantly, right?" Jimmy nearly choked on air. "He does not." "Oh, he absolutely does," Ashley said. "It's honestly annoying." Jimmy couldn't stop smiling. Ashley's expression softened slightly. "I've known Smith a long time," she admitted quietly. "I've never seen him this happy before." Jimmy looked toward the coffee shop window again. Smith noticed him immediately and smiled without hesitation. That familiar warm smile that somehow still made Jimmy nervous every single time. Ashley laughed softly. "Yep, that look right there." Jimmy's face turned red. Before he could respond, Smith walked back outside carrying 2 drinks. "What are you two talking about?" Ashley smirked. "How painfully in love you are." Smith nearly dropped the coffees. Jimmy covered his face while Ashley laughed loudly. "You're evil," Smith muttered. "I'm observant," Ashley corrected proudly. She waved goodbye a minute later, leaving Jimmy and Smith standing awkwardly beside the truck. Smith handed Jimmy his drink carefully. "You okay?" Jimmy nodded while smiling shyly. "She likes you," Smith said. Jimmy rolled his eyes. "Apparently she enjoys embarrassing us too." Smith grinned. "That part's true." For a second, they just stood there looking at each other. And Jimmy realized something terrifying. He wasn't scared anymore. Not the way he used to be. Because somewhere between late-night drives, secret kisses, and quiet conversations, Smith had become home to him. 2 weeks later, prom night arrived. Jefferson High transformed the gym into something almost unrecognizable. Glowing lights, music, huge decorations, and students dressed like they were attending some Hollywood event. Jimmy adjusted his tie nervously while standing outside the entrance. "This was a terrible idea," he whispered. Smith looked over while fixing the sleeve of his black suit. "You've said that 6 times. Because I'm panicking." Smith stepped closer with a soft smile. "You look amazing, Jimmy." Jimmy immediately looked down. "See?" Smith laughed quietly. "You do that every time." Jimmy tried to breathe normally. "You realize the entire school is about to stare at us, right?" Smith gently reached for his hand, then let them stare. Jimmy looked at him carefully. Smith's confidence looked real tonight. But beneath it, Jimmy could still see nervousness hiding there too. That somehow made him feel calmer. Because they were both scared, and they were still doing this together. Smith intertwined their fingers fully. "Ready?" Jimmy took a deep breath. "With you?" "Yeah." The moment they walked into prom together, conversations around the ballroom immediately dropped. People stared openly. Some looked shocked. Others smiled supportively. Jimmy's heartbeat became so loud he could barely hear the music anymore. Instinctively, he started pulling his hand away, but Smith held on tighter. Not aggressively, reassuringly, like he was silently saying, "I've got you." And somehow that was enough. As the night continued, something unexpected happened. Nobody laughed. Nobody caused a scene. A few people whispered, sure, but mostly, people accepted it. Some students even complimented them together. Maya nearly screamed when she saw Jimmy. "You guys look disgustingly cute," she announced dramatically. Jimmy laughed while Smith looked ridiculously proud of himself. Hours passed faster than Jimmy expected, and for the first time at Jefferson High, he wasn't trying to disappear into the background. He was dancing, laughing, actually happy. Near the end of the night, the DJ switched to a slow song. The lights dimmed softly across the ballroom. Jimmy immediately looked nervous again. Smith noticed instantly. "Dance with me." Jimmy laughed quietly. "I'm terrible at dancing." "Good," Smith replied. "So am I." Before Jimmy could protest, Smith gently pulled him toward the dance floor. The gym suddenly felt smaller, closer. Jimmy wrapped his arms nervously around Smith's shoulders while Smith rested his hands carefully at Jimmy's waist. Soft lights moved across the room around them. Jimmy's heart felt completely overwhelmed. "This feels unreal," he admitted quietly. Smith looked at him carefully. "You know what feels unreal to me?" "What?" "That somehow the cutest guy in school likes me back." Jimmy rolled his eyes immediately while blushing hard. "You flirt too much, and you love it." Unfortunately, Smith was correct. They moved slowly together while music echoed through the ballroom. For a few minutes, Jimmy forgot about everyone else completely. No rumors, no fear, no hiding, only Smith. Smith looked down at him softly. "There's something I want to do." Jimmy's pulse sped up instantly. "What?" Instead of answering, Smith leaned closer slowly, giving Jimmy every chance to stop him. But Jimmy didn't want him to stop. Not anymore. Smith kissed him gently in the middle of the dance floor. The entire room seemed to disappear around them. Jimmy melted into the moment instantly, his hands gripping lightly against Smith's suit jacket. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reckless. It was warm, sweet, real. When they finally pulled apart, Jimmy heard cheering somewhere nearby. Maya was absolutely losing her mind across the room. Smith laughed softly against Jimmy's forehead. "There you are," he whispered again. Jimmy smiled so hard it almost hurt, because standing there under glowing prom lights with the boy he loved holding him close. Everything finally felt real. The weeks after prom felt different in a way Jimmy couldn't fully explain. Not because anything around them had changed, but because something inside him finally had. Smith no longer felt like a secret he was afraid to lose. He felt like someone real in his life now, someone who stayed, no matter who was watching. School mornings still started the same, with crowded hallways and loud voices echoing through Jefferson High. But now, Jimmy didn't walk them alone. Smith always found him, sometimes at his locker, sometimes outside the cafeteria, sometimes just waiting quietly by the stairs like it was the most natural thing in the world. And every time, Jimmy's heart still reacted like it was the first time. One Tuesday morning, Jimmy arrived early and found Smith already sitting on the front steps of the school. Head down, hoodie on, phone in hand. For a second, Jimmy just watched him. It was strange how someone so confident in front of everyone else could look so calm and quiet when he thought no one was paying attention. "Didn't know you were an early bird," Jimmy said softly as he walked up. Smith looked up immediately and smiled. "I'm not. I just didn't sleep." Jimmy frowned slightly as he sat beside him. "Why?" Smith hesitated. That was new. He usually didn't hesitate with Jimmy anymore. "Just thinking," Smith said finally. Jimmy studied him carefully. "About what?" Smith let out a small breath and leaned back on his hands. "After graduation, everything changes." Jimmy's chest tightened slightly. They had avoided that conversation for weeks, without even trying. "I know," Jimmy said quietly. Smith looked over at him. "You're not scared?" Jimmy thought about it honestly. "I am," he admitted, "but not like before." Smith's eyes softened. "That's new." Jimmy nodded slightly. "Yeah." A quiet moment passed between them while students started filling the campus behind them. Then Smith spoke again. "I got an offer," he said. Jimmy turned toward him immediately. An offer? Smith nodded. College. Out of state. The words landed heavier than Jimmy expected. Not because he didn't know this would happen someday, but because hearing it made it real. When? Jimmy asked quietly. Into summer. Jimmy stared at the ground for a moment. His mind tried to stay calm, tried to be logical, but his chest felt tight anyway. Smith watched him closely. Say something. Jimmy gave a small, nervous laugh. I don't know what to say. Smith nodded slowly like he understood. I wasn't going to tell you like this, he admitted. Jimmy looked up. Then why are you telling me like this? Smith exhaled. Because I couldn't sleep thinking about it, he said honestly. And because pretending it's not happening feels worse. Jimmy swallowed. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, real. After a moment, Jimmy spoke softly. Are you leaving? Smith didn't answer immediately. That pause was enough to make Jimmy's heart drop slightly. Then Smith shook his head. I don't want to. Jimmy's breath slowed a little. Smith turned fully toward him now. I've been trying to figure out what I want more, he said quietly. The future I planned or the life I actually want. Jimmy listened without interrupting. Smith continued. And every time I think about leaving, I end up thinking about you instead. Jimmy felt something warm and painful at the same time in his chest. That's not fair, Jimmy whispered. Smith gave a small smile. Yeah, I know. A soft wind moved across the school steps. Jimmy looked down at his hands. I don't want to hold you back, he said quietly. Smith immediately shook his head. You're not holding me back. Jimmy looked up. Smith's expression was serious now. You're the only thing that makes staying feel like a choice worth making. Jimmy didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. Instead, he just reached for Smith's hand, and Smith held it instantly. No hesitation, no distance, just them. The school bell rang in the background, pulling students inside, but neither of them moved right away. Smith finally spoke again, quieter this time. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. Jimmy nodded. Me neither. Smith gave a small, soft laugh. That's terrifying. Jimmy smiled faintly. Yeah, a pause. Then Jimmy added honestly, but it's less scary with you here. Smith looked at him for a long moment, like he was memorizing him. Then he gently squeezed Jimmy's hand. Good, he said softly, because I'm not going anywhere today. Jimmy smiled. And for now, that was enough.